Chris, that's a fantastic question. You know, I use a lot of different species of line depending on how I'm fishing. Open water, if I'm pitching jigs, especially casting away from the boat, even certain crankbaits at times, I love using braid with a fluorocarbon leader. I like the no stretch factor. But there's other times where I use monofilament, where I need a bait to load up a little bit more, whether I'm using certain types of corks or certain presentations where I want that rod to load up a little bit better, I'll use monofilament. Flash forward to ice fishing like we're doing today. When I'm outside hole hopping, I'm primarily using monofilament just because I know that monofilament's not gonna freeze up when I'm going from hole to hole. Line management's really easy. However, if I'm in a shelter, I really like using braid because I like the fact that I can feel every little tick on the line. Now, I fish a lot of clear glacial lakes, chasing walleyes all winter long. And in those situations, I'll use a braided line with a swivel and then like a fluorocarbon leader, something that's gonna be a little bit low vis, especially in that clear water. Get it away from that braid a little bit. That's gonna pay big dividends. I've seen it so many times on the ice where people tie braid direct, and that's fine in low light situations, but in clear water, you're really gonna wanna get some piece of either mono or fluorocarbon on there to get that braid away from your bait. James, I think that's fantastic. You're taking your 11-year-old grandson out ice fishing, especially to Devil's Lake. It's such a great resource. Lots of fishing opportunities. You know, if the bite's slow for walleyes, Devil's Lake has great opportunities for pike. You know, you can put out some tip-ups. One nice thing about ice fishing is kids can get outside, they can run around. You've got great electronics. They really zone in on that. There's just so many things that ice fishing offers to youth that things that they can do. So, you know, for me, I have a couple of young kids at home. Every time we go out fishing, snacks is number one. Lots of bait for them to play with. Get them outside. They, bring their snow pants, their boots, so they can run around, and then also tip-ups. Tip-ups can keep kids interested for hours, especially if there's lots of pike in the area. And when you're up on Devil's Lake, there's plenty of opportunities for pike fishing up there. So, even if the walleye bite's a little bit slow, you can always go in and chase pike, even perch. I think you guys are gonna have a ball. Tony asked the question, how do I find fish on a small lake that I've never fished? Obviously, it touched on the fact that there's a lot of fish houses in one particular area, but they're not really catching that many. And a lot of times that's the case. You get a lot of that traffic out there, whether you're chasing crappies or bluegills or walleyes or whatever it is. You'll get a condensation of houses or people in the area, and as soon as that noise is on the ice, they're drilling, they're catching fish. Those fish are out there. I see it a lot in wintering basins for crappies where people will be loaded in one particular area. They might be catching them early ice, but then after that it kind of fizzles out. One thing I can suggest is obviously drilling holes to look for fish, but a lot of times, especially in some of those wintering areas, I'll actually start up on the edges. So I'm not fishing the deepest part of the hole. The other thing that I'll seek out are weed flats. If you can find some areas where you have, good green cabbage weed in the winter, lo and behold, you're gonna find panfish, walleyes, pike, a lot of different species in those areas. And a lot of those shallow water areas get overlooked. Everybody automatically goes right out to that deep water, those wintering areas, and they overlook that. The other thing, like I touched on, are edges, getting off the edge of that wintering area and working that edge, whether it be a point that sticks out or even just kind of drilling holes down the edge until you bump into a school of fish, because not all the fish in the lake are right in the deepest part of the lake. You might have a few pods of fish in those wintering areas, but there's lots of other structure in the lake, especially if it's a lake that has a lot of structure. I would seek out some of those mid-lake humps, those shallow water weed flats. Those areas always produce fish in the winter, especially if there's green weeds. TJ, one of my go-to baits has always been a buckshot spoon, even spoons in general. I use a wide variety of spoons throughout the winter months, depending on if it's a nighttime situation or daytime. Like right now, we've got high sun, so I'm using more natural colors, whether it's perch or gold or silver. When you get in those low light conditions though, it's really hard to beat, you know, some of the Northland UV spoons, just tipping them with a minnow head. And then I almost always have a dead stick down, you know, just a plain hook or a small forage minnow jig, tipped with either a shiner minnow, rainbow. I love using big rainbows, and I always have that dead stick as 2 options. So a lot of times you'll draw them in with the spoon. If they won't hit that, they'll hit the dead stick, or vice versa. They'll come into that live bait, and then as soon as they see that spoon, they'll come over and nail it. But that's kind of my 1-2 punch, and setting up in the right area, location, 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 you know, on the very point of a structure, or getting away from the crowds and finding an inside turn or something on the break line that's going to draw those fish into the area. That finding that location first and then deploying the right baits is always key to catching fish all winter long. Hey Dennis, that's a great question. I love chasing perch. You know, lots of times if I'm nagged by small perch, I'll just upsize my bait. You know, instead of using larva chandelier, let's say on like a small forage minnow spoon, I'll upsize it to a buckshot spoon with a minnow head, you know, kind of beating the silt and keeping it away from those fish. Another thing that's gonna really help you is using an underwater camera. You know, a lot of times if you're in areas where there are jumbos around, but there's lots of, I'd call them natives or local perch in the area, but you know there's jumbos in that area, by using that underwater camera, you can kind of keep it away from the small ones and target those big jumbos. Now, if you're fishing a spot for a long period of time and you're just not seeing any jumbos, that's when it's time to move. And really, the time of year is going to dictate, and the lake or situation is going to dictate whether you should go shallower or deeper. I mean, every fishing situation is different. I found it where I've slipped up in the weeds and definitely caught bigger perch, but I've had other times where I got out into deeper water, got away from those native or those resident perch in that area, and lo and behold, and found fish. But typically you will find them, they're schooled together. You know, if you find one jumbo, typically there's more in the area, so you can kind of search that area. But really using that underwater camera, upsizing your bait, that's gonna pay big dividends and keep those little perch at bay. Hey, if you like these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. There we go. Now that's what I'm talking about, baby. Big old walleyes.
Look at that right there.